Title: Beneath the Flame of Truth. Year: 154,166,666. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Avonhold was built like a spiral, each tier circling the last. From the towering spires of the upper cast down to the very vaults of the nameless. Stories didn't travel between tiers. They stayed sealed, like jars of breath held too long. That is, until the rectangular arrived. She bore no name, only a collection of bones carved with languages no one remembered. Her skin was earth-stained, her hair a wild weave of roots and dried ink. They called her a myth, a warning, a curse. She called herself a librarian, but her books were buried people, and her library was Avonhold itself. In the dark of the lost vault, she met the forgotten librarian who had once curated the city's Unity archives before the Great Silence. His memories were fractured, but his hands still knew how to read without sight. Together, they began to dig not through earth, but through silence. Chapter 2. Avonhold had once been one city. Not 12 tiers of distrust, but after the flame wars, knowledge became dangerous. Truth was fragmented, scattered like seeds no one dared water. The rectangular walked between levels, planting relics, echoes of common stories hidden beneath floors, inside walls, etched into old songs. The librarian translated what she found. She wept when he read a love letter pass between a skyborn scribe and a tunnel dweller. He trembled when she unearthed a treaty inked on tree bark between a river clan and a cloud temple. The people began to notice. They followed chalk spirals to secret readings. They left offerings, old journals, broken instruments, memories in envelopes, and slowly the spiral reversed. Ruth became contagious. Chapter 3. When the city's stewards tried to silence them, they lit no torches. They simply spoke, over and over, each voice naming the shared flame. To tell the truth is to step into flame and name it home. The rectangular whispered at the city's center, where all tiers met. The spiral glowed. Stories fused. The vault doors opened. And from the depths came not revolution, but remembrance. Avonhold was no longer 12. It was 1. The rectangular vanished, leaving only her carved bones arranged in the shape of a spiral. The forgotten librarian remained, now keeper of the unified story. Above the central spire, etched in a ring of firelight, reads the city's new motto: to tell the truth is to step into flame and name it own. Idol. The names we carry. Yeah, the 25th, the 27th, the 27th. Era. Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Fallon floated above the river it once worshipped, tethered to memory by bridges long since crumbled. Its leaders had outlawed grief, not in word, but in function. No mourning periods, no memorials, only forward momentum. The tear catcher defied this silently. She moved through alleys in gray roads, gathering tears no one admitted they shed. Each one was kept in a glass orb, strung together in a necklace of sorrow. Her collection hung softly at night. One day, while following whispers near the Echo Wharf, she heard someone weeping beneath the river. Not metaphorically, literally. She dove, and met the one beneath the river. Chapter 2. He was not a myth. He was once Fallon's greatest judge, drowned by decree when he refused to condemn a rebel child. The city buried him in current and silence. But the river remembered. It preserved him not in body, but in echo. He lived in a fold of memory. He greeted the tear catcher with a name she hadn't heard since childhood, a real name. The tightest prisons are the names we refuse to outgrow. He asked her to choose, forget what she reclaimed and return to anonymity, or bear it and everything it demanded. She chose the second. Chapter 3. With a scream made of all the silences she'd swallowed, she returned to the surface and shattered her necklace in the city square. The orbs exploded into memory. Citizens dropped to their knees, remembering every goodbye, every loss, every buried name. The leaders tried to flee, but the people no longer followed. The river rose, not to flood but to wash. It carved new paths. Fallon reconnected not by bridges, but by stories. The tear catcher became the keeper of grief, and the one beneath the river was honored in stone beside the fountain that now weeps each dawn, carved in its base. The tightest prisons are the names we refuse to outgrow, but the moment we speak them, we become the key. Title: Truth in Ruin. Year: Era. Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Ural was a marvel of precision, an empire built on rulebooks, contracts, and towering obsidian courts. Each citizen bore a number, each choice a consequence. Crime here was an escaculation, not a passion. The cursed gambler had made many. Once a registrar of truth, led verdicts. He had wagered one decision too many, staking not coins but oaths. When he lost, his voice was replaced with a whisper that only echoed in those who already doubted themselves. They exiled him to the waste of ice, where clarity froze to silence. But silence is not emptiness. Beneath the frozen lakes lived the voice under ice, once a myth, now flesh. Chapter 2. She had been the city's first justice mirror, tasked with reflecting truth back at those who refused to see it. But she thought too much. Her truth shattered laws. So they buried her, but she learned to speak through ice. The gambler heard her. Every night she whispered one phrase. When the world collapses, your truth steps into the light. He began to dig, not with tools, but with memory. He uncovered fragments of court records twisted by ambition. He mapped the faults in the city's moral calculus. And he returned, not to plead, to reveal. Chapter 3. Ural had begun to falter, its systems overwhelmed by the rigidity it worshipped. Small truths ignored had cracked the bedrock of empire. The gambler walked into the hall of verdicts, silent, but burning with purpose. The voice under ice, now encased in translucent flame, stood beside him. She didn't accuse. She reminded, case by case. They presented evidence of overlooked sacrifices, of integrity dismissed, of failure punished instead of understood. And the city listened, because collapse had already begun. And in collapse, truth has no shadows. The cursed gambler spoke his final wager. If you embrace the truth of failure, you may yet earn the reward of becoming. The court rewrote its creed. Now, in the center of the hall, encased in the ice that never melts, glows. When the world collapses, your truth steps into the light. Do not run. Rise. Title: Petals of the Unspoken. Year: 153,205,128.1. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Festival of Roots in the village of Vela had been held for 600 years. Always the same songs, same flowers, same vows whispered beneath the weeping trees. But none remembered why. The thorn embraced dead. She had been born on the festival's eve, her cry sharper than the traditional bells. Her parents wrapped her in thorns instead of lace, a symbol of protection misunderstood as punishment. She grew into a gardener not of plants, but of forgotten truths. She dug into earth that no longer bloomed, and found bones wrapped in silken lies. Tradition, she whispered, is not sacred because it is old. It is sacred if it still serves, and not all traditions had. And came the alchemical fool. Chapter 2. He was a wanderer with lips stained by forbidden berries and laughter that unraveled logic. He danced where others prayed, asked questions during rituals, and kissed the thorn embrace during the offering song. Gasps followed. So did exile. But she didn't leave, not immediately. She stayed long enough to ask one question. Why do we vow obedience without knowing whom we're obeying? The elders responded with silence. So she packed her thorn-wrapped scrolls and followed the fool into the woods where no words were law. Together they built a new rite. No chanting, no hierarchy, only reflection and story, wobbling beneath stars. The next spring, children from Vela wandered into the woods, seeking the truth behind the flowers that never bloomed again, and they found it. Chapter 3. The thorn embrace returned to Vela not to demand change, but to invite curiosity. She brought no blame, only seeds and questions. What you deny in truth grows teeth in the dark and waits. The elders did not respond, but the children planted the seeds, and the trees that grew wept no more. They laughed. The fool vanished again as fools do, but his questions remain. Now during the Festival of Roots, new stories are told beside the old ones, and beside the weeping tree, now blooming with laughter fruit. A new carving reads, what you deny in truth grows teeth in the dark, and waits. Better to dance with what you fear than to kneel before what never served. Title: Storms Between Seconds. Year: 153,041,025.1. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the temporal stronghold of Elsworn, clocks ruled more than time, they governed fate. Each citizen bore a time rocket, a wristbound device predicting their most efficient path. Deviating brought penalties. Predictability was perfection. The time bender defied all of it. She had no time rocket. She moved between seconds, felt the tilt of probability in her spine, and listened for cues not for algorithms, but from within. Her soul does not speak in words, it speaks in stormed silence and synchronicities. No one understood her, except the pale kin. They arrived on a windless dawn, cloaked in entropy, shedding no shadow. No records confirmed their origin. They claimed no future, no past, and yet the time bender felt a pattern in their gaze. Not chaos, challenge. Chapter 2. The pale kin spoke through shared dreams. They showed her a fractured vision elsewhere in ruin, its time rockets shattering, time folding like paper into the sea. She saw herself at the center laughing, or screaming, or both. To avert collapse, she would have to walk the sequence maze. A spiral of moments discarded by fate. Each wrong step erased in memory. Each right one transformed to truth. No guide. Only storm, silence, and synchronicity. She accepted. Inside, she relived her regrets backward. The lie she told her brother became a feather. Her greatest fear, a snowfall. Her worst failure, a golden bell that chimed without sound. And when she emerged, she was no longer calibrated to Elsworn. She was real. Chapter 3. The pale king vanished, leaving behind a ripple in the time grid. Elsworn began glitching, but instead of fear, people found opportunity. Artists began sculpting events from skipped seconds. Healers rewound trauma. Poets stitched verses from missed moments. The time bender became an instructor, not of how to control time, but how to feel its dance. Her first lesson was always the same. Your soul does not speak in words. It speaks in storms, in silence, in synchronicities. Listen well. In the plaza where her time rocket once would have hung, now stands an open spiral of wind, chimes, and glass shards. No clock, only the sky. And beneath it, engraved in shimmering light, your soul does not speak in words. It speaks in storms, silence, and synchronicities. The challenge is not to solve it, but to become it. Title: The Ownership of Fear. Year: 152,628,204.6. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. Veyron Core was a city that never changed by design, built on a grid of eternal light. Its systems auto-adjusted to environmental shifts, economic tides, even emotions. Perfect adaptation, they called it, but in truth, nothing ever truly moved. The builder of Broken Time had been exiled from Veyron years before for proposing an upgrade that required disruption. Now she lived on the outskirts, in the uncoded zone, where time ran freely and decay was allowed. When the lark of liminal waters arrived at her door, cloaked in mist and murmuring riddles, she knew Veyron had finally faltered. What you feared to lose, the lark said, is already what owns you. Chapter 2. Inside Veyron, the light began to flicker, not for lack of power, but because the system no longer recognized its own origin. No one could override it because no one had built it. They had inherited perfection and merely maintained it. The city's leaders summoned the builder, desperate for rescue but unwilling to admit fault. She refused to return until the lark whispered to her, "If you do not shape it, the ruin will." So she entered the city not through the gate, but through the oldest sewer port, where the grid forgot to measure. There she began dismantling, not the system, the fear. She asked the people what they feared most. Loss of light, of certainty, of comfort. And she told them, then that is what owns you. Chapter 3. The builder replaced automation with conversation. She reintroduced error into the network, not to sabotage, but to allow growth. The lark sang from every canal, weaving songs of old rivers and forgotten shores, reminding the citizens that change was not a threat. It was a promise. Over time, Veyron became dimmer, but brighter in spirit. People began to adjust, not the city. The grid still ran, but it listened now. In the plaza where the central node once stood, a new structure was built. A pulsing crystal surrounded by cracked gears, always turning, always realigning, etched into its base in shifting metal. What you fear to lose is already what owns you. Free it, and yourself will follow. Title: The Price of Names. Year: 152,564,102.5. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. The southern province of Eltahar once boasted the finest record keepers in the known world. Every birth, oath, death, and victory was inscribed in golden script and sealed in the grand vault. But then came the fire of unmaking, and the ledgers were lost. Without records, identity became currency, and currency became forgery. People rewrote who they were, except one. The name that refuses never changed hers. She wandered from village to village, carrying the ashes of her birth scroll in a hollow doubt pendant. When asked her title, she recited it word for word, even when others flinched. It was a name linked to shame, forgotten war, a betrayal that historians now avoided. She did not. She wore it like armor. One day, she met the wanderer of closed roads, a cartographer who mapped only paths no longer walked, and together they reopened the vault. Chapter 2. The grand vault was buried beneath 3 cities and a riverbed. Most said it was legend, but the wanderer had seen it in a dream bound in chains. They found it buried in the spine of a broken statue, its entrance sealed not by locks but by names etched in unrepentant stone. Enter the name that refuses had to speak each name aloud, and forgive them, not blindly, but consciously. Forgiveness, when earned and given, becomes the highest magic. The stone crumbled, and sigh, they found ledgers untouched by fire. History is not erased, only hidden. Proofs inconvenient to victors. They copied nothing. They shared everything. Chapter 3. Villages held reading nights. People rediscovered who they had been. Some titles were revoked, others reclaimed. Children learned not just the deeds of heroes, but the mistakes of those they came from. The name that refuses founded the House of Open Records, where anyone could amend the truth, but only if they carried its weight first. The wanderer continued walking, drawing maps with footprints instead of ink. Outside the house, etched in black glass that reflects only when touched, reads, "Forgiveness, when earned and given, becomes the highest magic, and history, when faced, becomes home." Title: The Path of Quiet Steps. Here, 152,115,384.2 Euro. Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the hollow arcologies of Anchor Prime, ambition was not encouraged, it was engineered. Children were sorted by potential, citizens ranked by predictive success, and failure was reclassified as deviation. No one deviated. No one, except the skyborn Whisper. She was once one of their brightest analysts, until her simulations began yielding one repeated anomaly. The Riddle Master, a myth, a variable without inputs, an error the system could not correct. She pursued him out of necessity and curiosity, then something closer to belief. He led her not with riddles but with reflections, not answers but decisions, and the further she followed, the more she unraveled her need to win. Chapter 2. The Riddle Master lived among the forgotten, those discarded by the system for underperforming and predictive models. They didn't rebel. They reimagined. They built not from efficiency, but from adaptation. He gave her one task. Build something not because it will succeed, but because you will grow from trying. She failed repeatedly, but she learned. True purpose does not announce itself. It is approached one decision at a time. She stopped chasing perfection. She started choosing presence. And in time, the anomaly in the simulations corrected, not by eliminating the Riddle Master, but by including his pattern. Chapter 3. She returned to Ankara, not to restore the system, to reframe it. She dismantled the success ranking algorithm, replaced it with the metric of meaning, a framework measuring effort, growth, and resilience. There was pushback. There was fear. But there was also relief. Children who once trembled under scoreboards now found encouragement in their own trajectory. The Riddle Master remained elusive, but his mark was everywhere. At the center of the Academy of Becoming, a spiral path winds through trees grown from failed grass, each one now blossoming. At its entrance, a stone reads, "True purpose does not announce itself. It is approached, one decision at a time. Walk with wonder." Title: The Sacred Divide. Year: 151,923,076.8. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Valley of Drosmor was quiet, but not peacefully so. Its silence was weighty, held in place by old grief and older pacts. Every home had a threshold marked with salt and bones. Every family knew not to cross the lines drawn in ash. The sleepless midwife walked those lines daily. She was not bound by them. She enforced them. Her role was ancient, to usher life into the world and ensure the dead stayed out of it. In Drosmor, birth was an act of risk, not because of pain, but because newborns drew attention. Something waited in the fog, beyond the boundaries, something that once claimed the right to enter, but that right had been revoked by her. Chapter 2. When a child was born with eyes that shimmered like glass, the midwife knew the old rules were fraying. The parents begged her to stay, but she only whispered. The line remembers. That night the fog crept closer. The last accord had been struck 2 centuries prior, an agreement between Drosmor's founders and the unseen things of the marshes, in exchange for peace. No one would breach the sacred path that wound through the valley's heart, but someone had, not by foot, by voice. The child's cry had pierced the veil, and now the veil wanted its answer. Chapter 3. The midwife stood at the center of the path, soft, drawn spirals beneath her feet. In one arm, the child, in the other, a blade that had never known rust. The fog writhed from its depth, the once forgotten creature of limbs made of folded stories and eyes filled with echo. "I do not seek to break the accord," it said, "only to amend it." "No," she replied. "The accord is sacred. My path is sacred, and it demands my full attention." She laid the child at the center of the spiral. She sang the lullaby only sung once each century. The fog screamed, then receded. Boundaries reinforced, peace restored, but not without cost. The midwife's name was erased from memory. Her role passed to the next sleepless guardian. Only her blade remains planted in the earth where the path splits. Warning etched along its hilt in rosemary runes. Your path isn't narrow. It's just sacred enough to demand your full attention. Title: The Seed of the Unseen. Year 151,602,563.7. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The fortified city of Asanaro was built upon layers of legends, its towers rising from the ashes of forgotten wars, its foundations cemented in sacrifice no one dared name. Heroes were not born here, they were assigned. Every 10 years, the archive chose one. A person fated to vanish, so others may thrive. These were the grave sowers, vanishing with no monuments, no honors, only a name struck from record. The latest was chosen, and she ran. But the Soul Weaver found her. He did not chase her with threats. He told her a story, one that began with, "Some stories can only be heard when the soul is ready." Chapter 2. She listened of his time as a child in the border village that no longer exists, of his mother once chosen as a grey sower who accepted the role and planted something where no eyes ever looked, of the day he found that place lush, blooming, hidden from destruction because of her silence. He handed her a seed. "A gift," he said, "but only if you understand its cost." She returned to Asanara not with surrender, but with purpose. She asked to be buried not beneath the Hall of Flame, but in the riverbed. They refused, so she vanished again, and planted herself anyway. Chapter 3. Years passed. The archive faltered, not from rebellion, but from forgetting, for the river bloomed. A garden of unnamed origin overtook the shore, bearing fruit that healed even ancient wounds. The citizens began to gather. They asked who had planted it. No one answered, but everyone wondered. And then the Soul Weaver returned. He gathered their questions and spun them into a single scroll placed beneath the largest tree, etched into the bark, revealed only when touched by morning hand. Reads: "Some stories can only be heard when the soul is ready, and some sacrifices leave no tomb, only the future." Title: Echo of the Unbroken Word. Year: 151,282,051.2. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. When the sun shattered over Nero's Roman 3, it didn't scream, it simply vanished, taking with it the last warmth of a star that had once birthed civilizations. But the people did not panic. They listened, because their leader, the voice behind the mirror, had prepared them not with lies or soothing half-truths, but with transparency sharpened into courage. She was not born a hero. She was born flawed and loud in a world that prized obedience. But she never whispered to survive. She spoke to unify. Now, in the twilight of this system, her voice guided billions. Her signal pulsed across the void. "We will not scatter. We will become echo that shapes new constellations." And they believed her because she had never lied. Chapter 2. The grave sower was her closest confidant and her sharpest critic. Where she spoke, he acted. Where she inspired, he reminded. His cape was stitched from failed treaties, his gauntlets powered by the promises others buried. They were opposites, and that was their strength. Together, they initiated Project Umbercoy, a plan to reignite stellar remnants through synchronized empathy fields. Wild, improbable, but the voice had seen in a vision. Not prophetic, but deeply human. A dream forged from countless shared truths. To power the device, the speaker had to sacrifice all illusions to reveal their core, their fears, their faults. The voice behind the mirror volunteered. Chapter 3. The day of activation. She stood before a galaxy-wide audience. No armor, no enhancements, just her voice. "I have failed," she began. Gasps followed, then silence. "I have doubted, I have stumbled, but I have never stopped believing in our capacity to rise again." Her confession ignited something beyond science. The core pulsed, echoed, burned, and the fragments of the sun began to glow not in fury, but in response. Stars die in silence, but their echoes outlived the galaxies. The grave sower later buried her cape in the soil of the lit world. Above it, a mirror stands not to reflect vanity, but to remind the leaders of the truth. The strongest voice is the honest one, even when it trembles. Title: The Breaking of the Veil. Year: 151,089,743.2. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the tiered city of Horivar, status was color-coded, worn in cloaks, burned into skin, announced in speech. Everyone knew who belonged where, and everyone who didn't was watched. The veil piercer had once worn silver, the highest caste, until she gave it up. The day she tore off her cloak in the council square was the day she became invisible, not erased, but refused. She wandered to the edge districts, where smog-filtered thought and prejudice was programmed into public interfaces. There, she met the Chainbreaker, a myth among the lower castes. Some said he could sever tracking tags with a breath. Others said he was a ghost, left behind by a forgotten rebellion. But when she found him, he was just a man with broken hands and a map of tunnels etched into his palms. Chapter 2. The Chainbreaker didn't ask why she came. He asked what she was willing to lose. "Your name," he said. "Or your illusion?" She answered. "When you stop pretending, the healing begins." They walked the tunnels beneath Korrivar, tracing the city's foundation, discarded materials, abandoned blueprints, and forgotten records of inclusivity raised by the caste initiative. She brought light. He brought memory. Together, they unearthed the original city charter, one written before the veil of division was cast. It spoke of shared gardens, of open dwellings, of voices that once held equal weight. They brought it to the surface, and they were arrested, but not silenced. Chapter 3. The trial became the reckoning. As the city watched, the veil-piercer spoke not in protest, but in questions. Who does the veil protect? What would we lose if it lifted? What have we already lost? The Chainbreaker stood beside her, chains wrapped, not in defiance, but in demonstration. When the sentence came, it was overturned not by law, but by collective refusal. People began removing cloaks, painted walls with shared names, reprogrammed interfaces to respond to intent, not identity. Now a mural stretches across Korrivar's central plaza. Two figures tearing through a curtain of light. Beneath it, written in glimmering ink that only appears in shadow, reads, "When you stop pretending, the healing begins. Dear the veil, not to destroy, but to see." Title: The Wild That Remembers. Year: 150,641,025.6. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The kingdom of Surreal had long since silenced its myths. The old stories of wolves that whispered names in sleep, of swords that dreamed, of moons that carried memory, were locked away in the archive of forgetting, deep beneath the palace. The present, they said, needed no past, but the past had other plans. The voice of the moon's shadow was born on the last night. Twin moons aligned in omen. No one understood anymore. She came speaking backwards. Her first words, not cries, but echoes of names buried in dust. They called her broken. She called herself remembering. At 16, she was sent to the monastery of Temperance, a place where unruly children were polished into servants of reason. There she met the Blade Dancer. He was once royalty, now shadow practitioner, exiled for dancing too wildly beneath the old trees. She called him wild. He called her true. Together, they broke the archive's seal. Chapter 2. The forgotten stories surged forth. Beasts made of glyphs crawled from parchment. Songs long silenced rose into the air, summoning wind where no windows stood. They didn't flee. They listened. The voice read aloud a tale of a sword that refused to strike until it had tasted its wielder's tears. The Blade Dancer wept. The sword in the archive's heart began to hum. Together they lifted it not to fight, but to remember. Surreal trembled. The king sent armies, not out of cruelty, but fear of what the past might demand of the present. The Blade Dancer met them not with steel, but with steps. Every became a story, every parry a proverb, and when the voice sang the old lullaby of the two-faced moon, the soldiers dropped their blades, because their grandmothers had sung that same tune. Chapter 3. Surreal changed. The archive of forgetting became the circle of remembrance. Children were taught to trace their roots, not to wield pride, but to carry wisdom. The voice of the moon's shadow became the keeper of echoes. Her presence was requested at every birth, not to bless, but to remind. The Blade Dancer taught again not choreography, but surrender. Their legacy, not conquest, continuity. Etched above the new archive door, in a script once banned, glows the words, "What you called weakness was wildness uninitiated. And now we dance with what once was lost." Title: The Clumsy Balance. Year: 150,576,922.8. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the quaint crater town of Slumberfold, everything worked just barely. The baker burned half his loaves, the constable had a limp that squeaked, and the mayor once got lost in his own speech. But no one minded. Life functioned on a strange equilibrium of minor dysfunction. At the center of this was the shard-bearer, who wore a cloak made entirely of broken promises. Not metaphorically, she literally collected scraps of old contracts, vows, and grand declarations that never quite worked out. She was the local balancer. Her job? interrupt overconfidence, amplify overlooked effort, and occasionally drop banana peels in front of philosophers. It was important work, or so she insisted. Then came the starless flame and exile from the grand order of optimized perfection. He carried a scroll of equations predicting how every person should serve their community, with no room for whimsy. Chapter 2. The starless flame was not cruel, just excessively helpful. He offered perfect schedules, precise meals, ideal job placements. Productivity soared. Joy plummeted. Children stopped playing. Art dried up. No one tripped anymore. But also, no one danced. The shard bearer tried to intervene with one of her usual tricks. A pie to the face during his optimization seminar. It failed. He dodged it predictably. So she changed tactics. She invited him for tea. Bad tea, burnt leaf water, served in mismatched mugs. They sat in silence. She asked, "What did you want to be before they told you what you should be?" He answered, "A comedian." She handed him a rubber chicken and a broken tambourine. "Balance," she said, "often hides in places so ordinary they go unseen." Chapter 3. The starless flame laughed for the first time in 20 years. He adjusted the equations, not to eliminate randomness, but to include it. Slumberful became a test site not for perfection, but harmony. Town where plans allowed for accidents, and calendars had built-in wander hours. Children drew in mud. Adults failed safely. The mayor still got lost, but now on purpose. At the edge of town, where the pie-flavored breeze still drifts, there stands a sundial turned sideways. It never tells time, but always casts a shadow shaped like a grin, etched around its base. Lessons often hide in places so ordinary. They go unseen, so stumble, so laugh, so live. Title: The Kindness Rebellion. Here, 1,15,064,002.3. Era. Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the grim halls of Hatherton Academy, emotions were considered infections, especially kindness. Students wore iron collars that buzzed painfully if they lingered too long on smiles. Praise was rationed. Hugs were criminalized. The scholar of silence had once been their top enforcer. His books were tomes of cold logic. His punishments were poetic. But then came the oath-breaker turn. Savior thrown out of a revolution for making tea during a siege. He arrived, not with a speech, but with a tray of mismatched cookies and a note. "You look tired." The collar buzzed. The scholar winced. That didn't stop eating. Chapter 2. The oath-breaker had no plan. Just relentless kindness. He bandaged paper cuts, complimented disheveled shoes, and rewrote detention slips into poems. At first, the scholar reported him, then shadowed him, and began to mimic him, secretly. He left post-it notes in textbooks. "You're not alone." He installed a joke generator into the assignment upload portal. And finally, during morning announcements, he added, "Today's punishment protocol has been rescheduled indefinitely." Chaos, laughter, tears. What you exile within will rise in the faces of those you fear. He had exiled gentleness, and now it greeted him in the eyes of every student once too scared to meet his. Chapter 3. The headmasters retaliated, but their words rang hollow, because the students had started carrying extra snacks for each other, because the janitor played jazz in the halls, because the collars stopped buzzing. Overwhelmed by shared joy, the scholar of silence stepped down from his post and became the official unlearning facilitator. The oath-breaker turned savior. He opened a cuddle cafe next door. Now a statue stands in the courtyard, not tall or grand, but shaped like a teapot wrapped in a scarf, carved into its base. What you exile within will rise in the faces of those you fear, so greet it with kindness and cookies.